So excited again to be with you. My name is Reverend Gregory Holston, and this is Just Nation, a show that talks about faith, race, and issues of justice across the city of Philadelphia and beyond. Again, I'm here with my co-host, Nia Holston. Happy to be with her again, hosting really an incredible program today with some very provocative guests, including those who are going to talk about a really major and important issue around fair funding of our schools. Nia, again,
Yes.
how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Reverend Holston. It's wonderful to be here and wonderful to be with you all as we've taken our summer hiatus. Really excited for the show today. Really excited to talk about what really was a landmark decision in the Commonwealth Court around Pennsylvania's school funding system. And so we're so excited to have our guests here who have a range of experiences related to the educational system in Pennsylvania, and think it's going to be a great show. But to get started, I think you should tell our guests about your background that they might not know about you. The fact that you've been a teacher in Philadelphia schools. Not only were you a student as a child, but you also were a teacher in Philadelphia Public Schools.
Well, yes, for 7 years I taught at Orden Reed High School. Not the newer building they have today, but the building that used to be a junior high school that they made into a high school. One of the sadder stories of Philadelphia is, particularly around the issue of race in South Philadelphia, is that certain individuals did not want the black people who live in South Philly to actually go to South Philadelphia High School. And they petitioned and they lobbied and they pushed and they diverted all of the black students who went to Barrett and other middle schools and created a new high school called Orden Reed High School that was segregated. And then we're not talking about the 1940s or the 1950s, but literally the 1990s when this happened. And so that school was always felt the effects of underfunding. Not only underfunding from the state, but underfunding from the city itself and the school district itself. So it was really a challenge to teach in that school, and there are still many of those challenges still exist because of the continual racial segregation patterns that have created that school in the first place. But I was proud to teach there. I was proud to work with so many incredible staff under difficult circumstances, and some staff that weren't so incredible that we managed to work around or work through to do our best to have those children learn and feel some sense of community, some sense that they were cared for in that time in high school. So I really appreciate that time. So thank you for reminding me of that situation. I was in my 30s then, and you were a little one, but it was an important, impressive time. So thank you so much. And we're going to start on our right here with our guests here today, and start right here with first Mark Steer. Why don't you introduce yourself, Mark, and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Mark Steer. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center. I'm also a former teacher. I taught for 25 years at the college level, most recently at Temple University. And I left there in 2007 to run for city council, and then I did a lot of issue advocacy since. And for the last 10 years, I've been working on state public policy issues.
And you're part of the coalition that helped, has been pushing for fair funding of our schools?
That's right. Our organization, both the current one and the one I was working on earlier, it was part of what's now called the Pennsylvania Schools Work campaign.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been working on this issue for how long?
9 years now.
9 years. So glad to have you here today.
My pleasure.
Also to my right, we have Jerry Jordan. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Jerry Jordan, and I am the president of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. Prior to working for the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, I was a teacher in the school district of Philadelphia, and it just so happened one of the jobs, my very first job that I had, Orden Reed was one of the schools that I was responsible for, and I spent quite a bit of time there with the staff and Mr. Hopewell.
Yes, yes.
And Mr. Spector.
A little bit before my time on that one, yes, but The name is familiar.
But, you know, I have been very, very involved in this issue of equity in our school system. The opportunities that our children don't have has been something that we have really fought for over the years. And I believe that this is just such an important topic, and it is so critically important because it will make a difference. If we get the proper funding, it will make a difference not only in the lives of the children, but in the survival of Philadelphia and how the city will progress.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. And to Glennia, would you?
Yeah, and to my left, we have Liz Wesley.
Yes.
So if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Williams Wesley, and I am an 18-year veteran teacher here in the School District of Philadelphia, and now I'm an equity training specialist in central office. And I taught social studies, formerly from Parkway Center City High School, went on to teach at Central for about 5 years, and now I'm in this equity position.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I would like to see if we can talk a little bit about what is this fair funding thing all about? What does it mean to have fair and full funding of our schools? And what has been this campaign that has happened over these many years that has moved us to this point with the Commonwealth case that Nia just mentioned? And I'll start with Mark here.
So we've known for many years that funding in Pennsylvania for school districts is horribly inequitable, both on the basis of the economic situation of school districts, the racial situation of school districts, and Hispanic ethnicity. What that means is if you figure out what a school district should have in order to provide a good education, and we have state standards that actually establish that. Some school districts are close to adequacy, but very few, only about 11% are close. But if you look at the ones that are farther away, school districts that have a higher level of students living in poverty are much farther away than rich school districts. School districts with a high level of black students and Hispanic students are much farther away from adequacy than school districts with a low share of black or Hispanic students. And you know, that's a horrible situation, both in terms of the opportunities for those kids, but also in terms of the contribution those kids can make to our country. We know, people talk about when America was great. Well, America was never great in many respects, but we were economically prosperous in part because we gave opportunities and training to people as early as the 19th century in terms of elementary and secondary education, and the 20th century college education. It was never fair, but by providing opportunities, we took advantage of people's talents and abilities. There are a lot of brilliant young kids today who are not be able to develop those talents and abilities in a way that benefit them or that benefit the rest of us. And like Jerry said, Philadelphia's hurting because of that. Our whole state's hurting because of that. And I should just say, we are one of the worst funded in terms of equity states in the entire country.
What did the court case say in reference to what Mark just talked about? Jerry, can you talk a little bit about what the Pennsylvania Constitution says regarding fair funding and what the court case said in that regard?
Well, the Constitution is very clear in that it states that the state has the responsibility of providing a fair and equitable school system for students in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And after a very, very lengthy court case, the Judge Dubelier, ruled that the state was not doing what it is charged to do according to the state's constitution. And during the trial, witness after witness, district after district testified about what it is that their system, their school system in the Commonwealth does not have. I mean, it's not just Philadelphia. It's many, many districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia wanted to be a part of the lawsuit, but could not be. The court, lower court at the time, tossed Philadelphia and said, no, you can't be. And so William Penn, which is really adjacent to the Philadelphia school system, they were able to be one of the plaintiffs in the case. There were, if I recall, I think 6 school districts and 6 parents and 6 groups that wanted to be a part, that were a part of the suit. The Philadelphia Federation of Teachers wanted to be a part of the suit as well, and the court did not allow us to be. So we filed amicus briefs throughout this process in order to make sure that our members' points of view were heard during the case as well.
So the court case agreed that the school districts were not fair or fully funded, and that so a plan has to be developed to fairly and fully fund the schools. Is that correct?
That's correct. There is a committee of legislators, state senators and state representatives. It's a budget committee that's going through the Commonwealth, different cities, and they're taking testimony from residents and hearing what it is that we believe is needed in order for the systems to be fully funded. And they will issue a report in November, I do believe, to Governor Shapiro, and will say what it is that they learned as they've traveled through the various districts in the Commonwealth to get information. And after that report, the governor and the legislature will come together and they will begin to develop a plan for how they're going to correct the inequities in our school systems.
So I want to come back to that a little bit about how that process works a little bit more. But I'm curious what you think, Liz, about the idea that the school district has always been inequitable, always been unfair, always has been in a position of being underfunded. And how does that manifest itself in the work you do and your work in your time as a teacher?
It manifests itself in dilapidated buildings, outdated HVAC systems, broken windows, asbestos, lead. It manifests itself in overcrowded classrooms, overworked teachers, and what that means for our students then in these overcrowded classrooms with overworked teachers means that there's a lack of relationship building, because students become numbers, and then harm is done. Students become numbers, they're no longer an individual. Students become numbers and then their needs are not met because at that point everyone is treated the same, which we know is antithetical to equity. And so due to the lack of funding, there's a resource gap. Due to the lack of funding and this gap in funding, other groups have been able to come in to quote unquote help, whether they're universities, organizations, alumni groups, who pour into certain schools. And because they're pouring into certain schools, then they exacerbate that already existent gap, and also exacerbate harm in a community. Yeah.
Nee, if you'd
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to jump in.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. If there's a specific story of a student that you've seen, or a specific story that sort of highlights, and you've already explained it so succinctly and so beautifully, but a specific story that helps people to understand the magnitude of this problem, particularly as you've seen it over the last, several years, whereas we know in 2015 there were huge budget cuts, there were huge funding issues related to schools. And, as a teacher who in the last several years, would like to hear about some of the specific experiences that you've had where you see that discrepancy manifested.
Well, we see it in counselors being taken out of the schools. We see it in a lack of resources. Students need therapy. Students need more counseling. They need social workers in school. They need therapists in school. They need resources to help to combat what it is their day-to-day, their life is day-to-day. They should be able to get this in schools. If our schools were better funded, they could better serve the community, and we would not see as much harm. We would not see as much hurt. Students with needs, students with IEPs, special ed students, not being serviced in a way that they need to be serviced. We really saw this exacerbated during the pandemic. Schools what schools had it, what schools were ready and up and running and ready to go, and which schools were not, and which schools were struggling, and how we were able to respond to that need. I don't know if I answered it as specifically as you wanted to. This was one I don't have.
No, that's perfect. That's
good.
perfect.
Very good.
You're welcome.
And if you want to jump across and respond to anything anybody's saying, that's fine. I do want to share quickly, myself and Senator Vince Hughes actually did a walk from Overbrook High School to Lower Marion, and 90-degree heat in the summertime, 4 miles. That was quite a walk. We went through Overbrook High School first, and we looked at Overbrook, and we saw like some of the laboratories they had there. And the labs were right out of the 1950s. They still had Bunsen burners. They still had the little gas nobules that supposedly were connected to gas. There was no gas there anymore. And most of the science rooms were actually shut down because they were really unusable. And then we walked the 4 miles to Lower Marion. And as I got up to close to the school, first thing I see, I had never really gone to Lower Marion. First I see this massive football field. And I say, I didn't know the Eagles played out here. No, that's the high school team. And then I looked across and I said, oh, okay. I see a lot of buildings here. Which one is the high school? All of them are the high school.
Yes, they have campuses.
Campuses. They had 2 theaters. They had 2 swimming pools. I was like, 2. They were doing more construction and building more things. And I recall that a few years before, a friend of mine told me they took students from Overbrook High School to Lower Marion just to see the place, which is only that 4 miles away. And literally the students walked into those buildings, they broke down and cried. They cried because they said, nobody cares about us. How can you have this here just for these students, and then we have the school we have? They broke down and cried like, they were high school kids, but they broke down and cried like they were 3, 4 years old, seeing what they saw. And the shame that the teachers felt of the reality that they were facing each and every day, and the students of Philadelphia face each and every day. I think that's some of the power we're talking about here when we talk about fair and full funding of our schools. It means that for the students in Philadelphia at Overbrook High School, maybe they can have a high school like Lower Marion. Maybe they could have those facilities. Maybe they could have those kinds of resources and be right here in the city and have them. Anybody wants to respond to the story I just shared, or anything else you'd like to say, but this is emotional. This means our children forever, not for 50 years or 100 years, but ever since there were public schools in the city of Philadelphia, our children, black and brown children in this city, have gotten an unfair, unjust, unconstitutional, underfunded education. And how many tens and hundreds of thousands of young people have had the lives they've had because they have not had the same education as Lower Marion, right across the line is getting each and every day.
You know,
Can I-
Sure.
I just want
Yeah.
two quick things. One is, kids don't have to make that trip to see the difference because they watch TV shows that take place in high schools, and they compare what they see on TV to what their lived experience, and they know they're not being respected and treated well. And we can talk about the practical things about having teachers and guidance counselors, but I think there's a psychological and sociological impact on people's lives that we really have to consider.
Yes.
Why? Kids who don't think that the world values them are less likely to think they have opportunity because they don't. Less likely to think well of themselves because they wonder, why are we not being treated well? That's one point. The other point I want to make is it's a little quantitative. We did a study once of the New York and Pennsylvania border, schools on both sides of the border. And what we were looking at is what percent of students in those schools fill out the FAFSA form, which is the form to get financial aid to go into college. Now we're talking about just schools right on different sides of the border, demographically almost totally the same, geographically almost totally the same, and yet on the New York side of the border, because those schools are much better funded, you saw rates of applying for financial aid to go on to college or other kind of post-secondary education 30 and 40% higher. Now why is that? Well, one thing, they don't have guidance counselors to even tell them on our side of the border that there's funding available for them to go on to college. They don't have college prep courses. They don't have vocational education courses that prepare them for post-secondary workforce training programs. That's just horrifying to me that kids, just because of the geographical line, on one side don't have opportunities. And then it's horrifying for our state that kids with talents can't make use of them because we're not helping them do that. It's unconscionable. It really is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
one thing that I wanted to say is, one, to your point about the psychological aspects of this. You know, as my own personal story, going from Philly public schools to going to schools in the suburbs, I remember when I first visited the school I went to in the suburbs, and I remember saying to myself, wow, I get to go to school like the schools in the movies, you know, like in all of the high school movies that I was watching as a kid. I remember looking at the physical building and being like, wow, I never thought I'd be able to go to a school that looked like this. So to your point, I think that's absolutely right. You know, I wanted to share a little bit about the work that I do. I previously worked as a public defender in Philadelphia, and now I work at the Abolitionist Law Center as an attorney there, doing impact litigation and also directly representing a number of clients who are incarcerated or have been incarcerated. And in my time at the public defender's office, you often see the results of the lack of care, the lack of attention, and you know, it almost sounds like a broken record at this point. But in so many ways, you see the ways that the system is not acknowledging the harm that it's done to people because they're more invested in just having the system churn along, right? So if someone is accused of committing a crime, and the judge just wants them to go, well, why can't you do better? Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? That judge is not necessarily considering the lack of resources. That judge is not necessarily considering the trauma that student may have experienced. You know, when the pandemic was in full swing, you know, we thought about all of the loss of resources and the loss of support. And there wasn't a judicial mechanism to deal with that. There wasn't a judicial mechanism to deal with that trauma. And so you see from system to system to system, from the educational system to the criminal legal system to the prison system, you see this just this idea that people are just throwing their hands up and just saying, well, it's not my problem, it's not my responsibility, this is this person's personal responsibility. And I think what this case shows, and the experiences that you all have talked about, it's just really, it's all of our responsibilities. And how do we create not just equitable systems, but just systems, I think is incredibly important to talk about and to deal with.
And the interaction of those systems. When I was at Orden Reed, I taught emotional support class. So most of the kids I taught were in and out of the criminal justice system. In fact, oftentimes they would come right directly from prison to come to school and come to my class. And they also were those who were identified early on with those kind of emotional problems that had stunted their education process. So they had all of these needs, and there was supposed to be dollars directed to them, but all they had was me trying to teach them. With none of the counselor support, none of the mental health supports, none of the trauma supports. None of those things were really available. They talked about wraparound services that came every now and then, and not on a regular basis. And so I had to learn a lot of these things. I had to learn what oppositional defiant disorder was, and who labeled them that, and really, was that a label that was appropriate, or was it really a natural reaction to the resources, lack of resources that they have not received over the years? And who was dealing with real, certainly intellectual problems? Who was dealing with emotional responses? Who was dealing with logical responses to the things that they have experienced? And managing all of that in a classroom of about 10 kids. So we didn't even begin to address those needs. But when I found out outside of my small classroom, 90% of the kids at Orden Reed were going through the same thing. Same issues. And had no counseling, had no emotional support, had none of the things that they needed to work through those issues.
Then you think about that generationally.
Yes, because that was in the 90s when I taught. So I said that was the 4th generation of that.
Yeah, there's been decades.
Decades. Mom is struggling. Grandmom is struggling. And that's in the 90s. Great-grandmom was struggling. They all were struggling. And so we always talk about maybe the grandmom who keeps the family together. No, that grandmom is gone now. What you have now is 5, 6, 7 generations of the same kind of thing, of the underfunding of schools, of the lack of fairness in the schools, of the lack of resources in the schools that now has affected all of these generations. And then when we see the manifestation of that in terms of gun violence, we're like, well, where did these kids come from?
Our schools.
Our schools, and our failure to give them the resources and give their mothers the resources and give their grandmothers the resources and give their great-grandmothers the resources that they deserved years ago, so that generationally we would not be in this condition now.
You really just articulated the importance of this case, because it is the opportunity for things to change.
Yes.
And for all of the points that you made about the things that are lacking and have been lacking in our schools for decades and generation after generation, that if indeed those services are put in place in school districts across this Commonwealth, it's going to make a difference. It's going to change. We're not going to have the number of children getting into the criminal justice system because they're going to enjoy, number one, going to school. Kids basically really like school. You seldom find a child who doesn't like school if the school is offering something that interests that child. And when we look at our system, it's lacking. I think I can go out on a limb and say that there is probably not a high school in this school district that has a orchestra or marching band that, you know, has, some of them have choirs, some don't, but kids want to latch on to something. And I believe that all children should leave school every day having been successful at something. At something. And but you can't, it's not going to always be the reading and the writing and the arithmetic. It's, you need to have the additional resources to support the child's growth and interest. And I will tell you, when school is an interesting place that kids want to be, you eliminate many of your discipline problems in school. You eliminate the crime in the streets because kids will stay after school in order to participate in an activity that they are interested in. You know, when we have a workshop school, high school here in Philadelphia, and children build cars. They learn how to build cars, and when they finish that program and graduate, they will graduate with a certificate to be able to go in and get a job that's paying $50,000 or $60,000 to start at $50,000 or $60,000 because they know how to go into that car, and they are licensed to repair it. And many of the children over the years have won national competitions, but they know that they're leaving with a skill that's going to provide them with their livelihood. We don't have enough programs like that in the city of Philadelphia. We've got to, and this case, if funded properly by the governor and the legislature, will provide more career technical programs for kids to be able to participate in, so that all children, wherever they go to school, will be able to have the opportunity to spend a happy time in school every day.
I think, Mark, you want to jump in.
Yeah, I get infuriated when people blame the kids in Philadelphia for what's happening in schools. And because I used to teach them at Temple. When I started at Temple, Temple was a better place back then because about 80% of the students I taught, and I would teach introductory classes, a general education program, so I taught everyone. 80% were Philadelphian, mostly black and Hispanic kids. About 20% were from the suburbs, mostly white kids. And what I would find is that the kids coming out of the Philadelphia schools were not as well prepared as the kids in the suburban schools because they didn't have the kind of intensive instruction, as many teachers, as many resources, but they caught up. The kids who were able to get into Temple, they caught up because they had a hunger for learning that was just extraordinary. Most of them were first-generation, they were all first-generation college students. They knew that they had gotten an opportunity that was precious, and they were determined to take advantage of it. And they did that even though many of them were working 1 or 2 jobs. But, you know, in the 2 semesters they took with me, which was a writing-intensive course, they couldn't write very well in the beginning. By the end, they were as good as those suburban kids who frankly weren't as motivated because they had had it a lot easier. And so I saw right then that if we give Philadelphia's kids an opportunity, they are gonna, they love learning. They're gonna grab it. They're gonna appreciate it and take advantage of it. And it's just shameful that every single one of those kids in our schools don't have that opportunity now, because I know they would benefit from it. I've seen it.
It is, speaking of shameful, it is shameful that in Philadelphia, we have, I think, 3 school librarians in a system the size of Philadelphia. That is shameful.
That's a disgrace.
Yes,
disgrace.
but they're not required by the state standards, and therefore, when you have a limited amount of money in your budget, those courses, those positions that are not mandated by state law, they are eliminated, and that's what's been allowed to happen.
You know, I'm just interested, turning to the case, was anyone present for any part of the, when the case was being tried, for any part of the trial?
I watched some of it on TV.
So, you know, what sticks out to me in you know, following the coverage, certainly the comment that was made, you know, by the questioning attorney to a witness, essentially asking, what's the point of of, you know, funding it fairly. And I think he did this, and of course I'm paraphrasing, by saying, what's Algebra 1 to someone on the McDonald's track?
Yes,
That was it.
I remember
Yeah.
that clearly.
Yeah, and
That was
so it's just like the mask was pulled. And, you know, I think we have to talk about, this is intentional in some regard.
Yeah.
You know, when an attorney is not afraid to make a statement like that while questioning a witness, that is incredibly problematic, and just shows all of the ways, you know, just it really encapsulates how people feel about Philadelphia, how people feel about Philadelphia students, and how people feel about Philadelphia students of color.
Yeah, but as been said a couple times, not just Philadelphia, Lancaster, Reading, Allentown, all of Chester, all across the state, they're saying the message, these children can't learn. And in fact, one legislator was told by a lobbyist when asked the question, the problem is you want this money and you want to give it to these kids who can't learn.
The chair of the Senate Education Committee said that about Eichelberger about 8 years ago. And people wonder why we have underfunded schools and racially inequitable and economically inequitable schools. It's because it reflects the attitudes of too many legislators in our state. That's why we needed a lawsuit to force them to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And they're comfortable creating a system of the haves and have-nots. They want that. They believe that there are limited resources, and they want their folks to have all of those resources. And in fact, they would even take away resources from the people they consider their people if it meant that certain black and brown students wouldn't get it.
And they do that.
That's
They
exactly what's
practice that.
happening.
Liz, you want to jump in?
I was going to say that's exactly what's happening, and what you're talking about is deficit thinking around black and brown people, which is rooted in white supremacy culture here in America. And we need fair funding, and then we also need systems that make sure that the money is spent in equitable ways that do serve our community.
And so what's an example of that when you say make sure to spend in equitable ways?
Well, not on more school police or security. I know there are some things to be said about that, but the over-policing, specifically in schools where you have a high population of black and brown students who are already having too many encounters with police outside of schools to come in and have to then face more policing within schools. And so, again, I'll turn back to the funding needs to go towards healing, wellness, wholeness. You spoke about the 3 A's, you know, and that's not only academics, but then that's arts and athletics. That is what we need.
Absolutely. So to just piggyback on that, I also, certainly you had me on the tour, so we went to Upper Dublin High School too. And when we went there, I went into one class. There was a weather class. I can't say the word right now. But and they studied the weather.
Wow.
And they had the equipment where they could see a storm brewing in the Gulf of Mexico, and they could plot when that storm would come and hit Philadelphia. These kids. And they were linked directly to Channel 10's weather department, so they could tell Channel 10 what the weather would be. Now, in this class, there were 15 kids. There was 2 teachers, 2 teacher aides. So if any of the kids had any issue, they all could get one-on-one attention, one-on-one the whole time. And if a kid felt upset and emotional, they could just say, I need a timeout. And they were allowed to go down a hallway and go to a whole room dedicated to counseling.
That's what's necessary.
As long as they needed to be there, they would be there, and it would be no question that they were trying to do something to get out of class. They could stay there as long as they wanted to. I was like, wait a minute. In our schools, we got 33 in the class, and then we reslot in October, and we still got 33 in the class. We got 1 teacher, Most of the time, no aid, no special ed support, even though special ed kids are in the class. And we expect in that setting for the teachers to teach in a way that these kids can excel at the same level as those kids who got 15 in the classroom with all the technology. It's unfair, it's unjust, it has to end. Now, so maybe in this time left, let's talk a little bit about what types of dollars are really needed to do this right. And what are the suggestions we should really be giving to the Basic Education Commission on how to make this thing happen? Now, I'm looking at you, Mark, because you're shaking your head.
Professor Matt Kelly updated the state costing out study that happened during the Rendell administration. And his estimate is if you take into account not just basic education funding, but special education funding and the costs of upgrading buildings and things like that, we're looking at about $6 billion additional that we need each and every year. Now, that doesn't all have to come from the state. There's a local share that has to go up in many places as well. But a lot of it has to come from the state because we have one of the lowest percentages of state funding of K-12 education in the country. The national average is about 50%, we're about 38%. And that's one of the fundamental reasons we have so much unfairness. If the state doesn't provide a fair share of money, then the school districts that have a lot of money, like Lower Merion, can raise a lot of money without keeping people's taxes high. If a school district that doesn't have a lot of money, even if they want to keep their taxes high, they don't have enough wealth and income to generate money. So we're looking at, I'm not sure what the fair state share is, but we're looking at, I would guess, about $4 billion a year in additional state funding each and every year.
$4 billion from the state with $2 billion additionally coming from
local governments.
From local governments. Will that deal
and
with
that's rough. We're still working on those state share numbers.
That makes it fair and full, but that does deal with the legacy of not having all these years as well. How does that work?
But also, there has to be money also to repair buildings. If you put the money in, we can't spend it all. It's going to take time to train teachers because there's a teacher shortage, and teacher pay has to go up in school districts that have been historically underfunded, so we can recruit better teachers, not better, but more experienced teachers, better trained teachers.
And
we have to train them.
teachers.
Culturally competent teachers. We need to fix school buildings, so there's got to be a really big investment early, and then it has to be sustained over time. And now $4 billion sounds like a ton of money, but you know, it's not that much. Look, I do work on tax policy. I can give you, 5 good ideas where the state could get that money without raising taxes for most people in the state at all. So it's doable.
And the state currently has a surplus.
Right.
Yes.
We shouldn't forget that.
$14 billion surplus right now between the rainy day fund and the money that's just laying in the regular accounts. $14 billion. We could dish out 3 years right now and be able to push that out, extra state funding to do the fairness that we desire. And from my understanding, surpluses as they look forward for the next 5 to 6 years, there will be surpluses.
Probably not.
No? Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, probably not.
All right.
We'll spend down the surplus over the next couple of years.
So the tax plans to be able to raise the kinds of money, the state budget is $42 billion already. Right. So another $4 billion in a $42 billion budget is really not adding that much more to a budget that is already a good size. How does it look for actually getting something like this passed in the legislature right now?
I wish I could say I'm totally optimistic, but I'm not at this point because I think we have a House Democratic caucus that I think is committed to spending more money, but I'm not sure they're committed to spending at the level we're looking for. We have a Senate run by Republicans, and the Senate Republican caucus seems to want to change the subject. They want to talk about vouchers. They talk about a lifeline scholarship. What they forget is if you give a couple of kids a lifeline, you're letting every other kid sink. So they don't seem to be ready to do much, and the governor has been pretty quiet about it. He says he's committed to full and fair funding, but we haven't seen him come out with a plan yet. We hope that when this Basic Education Funding Commission reports, he will follow up with it with a strong plan. But I'm just going to say, people need to talk to their legislators and demand this. They need to be calling the governor. It's not going to happen without a lot of public pressure. The court decision helps a lot, but I've seen the impact of court decisions in different places around the country. Massachusetts, it made a big difference. New Jersey, it made a big difference for a while, but they've kind of backtracked. North Carolina had a court decision saying they needed to do equitable funding 40 years ago, and they still haven't done it. So it's going to take public pressure and a real commitment from the people of Pennsylvania, who are as morally incensed as we are here about this unfairness and recognize how we're all being hurt by it, to make their voices heard, because otherwise I don't know that it's going to happen, and it's not going to happen soon enough. And soon enough really means 10 years ago.
So the legislature, which votes on a budget each year, has been voting on now clearly an unconstitutional budget for all these years, and they can continue to vote for an unconstitutional budget, meaning they can violate the law and remain in their office and continue to get the perks that they get and the lifestyle that they have, while a young person around here in Philadelphia, if they go in the store and grab a $5 candy bar or whatever, is find themselves being arrested. What is the fairness in a system where legislators can consistently and admittedly violate the law and there's no recourse for their own action?
There isn't, and I think that's why we see the lawlessness in the communities. It comes out, in another way, and unfortunately, everyone understands that it's not fair. And after a while, people resent it, and they show it in their behaviors. I mean, there's always a cost to be paid.
Yes.
So that they can continue to sustain the prisons that are dotted across this state.
That's right.
That are in mostly regions other than Philadelphia, right? Where most people are coming from Philadelphia. There's a very real intentionality. I mean, and even in the JJSC, the Juvenile Justice Center here in Philadelphia, I mean, you see the city throwing its hands up and saying, we can't do anything about children literally sleeping on the floor and can't even have any of the resources that they need, and then going out and then going back to school and having to deal with that very, very real trauma, right? And that's what's happening right now.
Right now.
In the juvenile justice system. And so, juvenile injustice system. So, I mean, there's just so many ways that we can see the direct lines to the trauma and the lack of resources. And, it does feel that folks are siloed, right? It's easier to not talk about these other systems rather than to really address the very real problems and the very real traumas that people are experiencing.
Yeah, and again, how many of these other systems, criminal justice system, mental health system, hospital systems, are connected to the failure of our public education system? And that if the public education system was fairly and fully funded and operating equitably and actually operating as we would hope, how, as you have said earlier, how many of these problems would be minimized, and how many of the lifestyles of our young people would have even better lives than they do now. So this is really a mandate for those who are listening. The work has been going on for years. The campaign for fair, full funding has been at least 10 years long. I know our friend, Public Interest Law Center, Michael Churchill, told me he'd been working on this issue for 50 years. 50 years as a lawyer, and oftentimes getting bumped out of court, said that you can't process, you can't sue, you don't have standing. And so this victory is a victory to his work over all these years. But the issue is that we now have this unconstitutional situation that has been proven to be unconstitutional, and what are we going to be prepared to do for to make the change in our community. This is a major issue. This is an issue that can end or reduce the gun violence in our community. This is an issue that can make Philadelphia safer for everyone. This is an issue that can make and bring the kinds of young people into our community with the kinds of gifts and talents that are being wasted now that can improve the lifestyle for everybody in Philadelphia if they get an opportunity to do it. This is the time.
Mm-hmm.
This is the time to make the change. The state cannot say the resources are not there now. They've been saying that now for 20 years. We don't have the resources. Well, the money is there. The money is in the budget. So the question becomes, is not about whether we have the resources, which was really never the case, but definitely now we've clearly showed that we have the resources. The question is, do we have the political will to make the kind of changes we know can be made to make our life better for every child in Pennsylvania, and particularly the children in Philadelphia? And so as we get ready, I'm not sure what time we are on this. I'm looking at this, but I want to make sure that we end talking about how we move forward. So let's talk about how we move forward to make the change. Okay, that's great. I'm going to give each and every one of you a chance in your own areas, in your own sense of what you know. What can we do to make the change, to make sure this school system is fairly and fully funded? And I'm going to start on my right with Mark, just to give me your answer.
Well, I think I gave part of it before. People need to reach out to their political leaders. Now, we've got a lot of really strong advocates in Philadelphia for full and fair funding. Vince Hughes in particular, the way this lawsuit got started, my understanding was, this is before I started doing this work, is at one point Vince Hughes went to Michael Churchill and said, we're not going to get this through the legislature without the court, a court order. And I think that's what led to the impetus. And then it took a long time, as you said, to get it into the courts. But now it's in the courts. That's a big advantage for us because I think it carries some moral weight as well as some legal weight. But we still have got to get the legislators to respond, and we've got to get the governor to respond. Governor campaigned on full and fair funding, but now's the time to show that he really meant it. And I would tell, I should have brought it with me. Governor has a, you can text message him. I should have brought his number with him. I'm sorry I didn't bring it, but you can easily find it. Send him a text. Tell him, now is the time to fully and fairly fund our schools. He needs to hear from lots and lots of people.
We can put it on the
Put it on a cross?
description.
Yes, we can do that, and we will do that.
If you don't mind, can I jump in
Sure.
before Jerry?
Yes.
So I think that going forward, I think also getting students involved. I don't know if there's been a mass effort of students to write the governor. I don't know how well the governor would respond to texts from students. But I am wondering about hearing directly from the students in Philadelphia.
I think that's powerful.
That's a good project for a civic
is.
engagement
Yeah.
class, a
And
social
Yeah.
studies class.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Good civics lesson, and it could be
And
encouraged.
self-advocacy.
Could be encouraged. Jerry, would you like to share?
Yes, I agree with Mark that we have to certainly let our elected officials in Harrisburg know what's important and what it is that we need them to advocate for. But I think we've got to even have more people involved, because sometimes I talk to elected officials and they say, I don't hear from enough people. And we need to really make sure that the community understands. Quite often, people will help, but we have to ask for that help. They don't know how to get involved. And I think we have to really reach out in every community in this city. We've got leaders in those communities. We've got people in the faith-based community. We've got citizens are members of various faiths, and just the old neighborhood, the block captain, for have conversations and ask them to really do something, and they will, because I think everyone understands the value of public education and what it will mean if it's improved in this city. And it will make a difference for children, it will make a difference for our communities overall. I mean, it's just going to be very, very different. But I think everybody has to begin asking large groups of people so that there's a groundswell of
Yes.
people who are interested in making sure, then it will let the elected officials know that we're supporting their efforts, but it will also let the governor know that you've got a large number of people in the city of Philadelphia. This is an issue that's important, and you need to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nia, would you like
Yeah.
to share?
I mean, I think there are so many things. I often wonder why some folks aren't as engaged as they could be. And, I think it goes back again to systems, right? It's intentional that people are kept from the political process or kept from the legislative process, or told that that's not something for them, or told that voting doesn't matter, or just told so many abject lies about what's important and how to make change. I agree with Liz. You got to listen to the students. You've got to listen to those who are most directly affected by this issue, and not talk to them in a way that's patronizing to them or just letting them get involved just because or just for show, but really listening to their ideas and hearing from them and hearing their stories and the hurt, the very visceral hurt. The story you told sticks with me, right? Of students just crying, seeing the resources that they're not getting. Letting students tell those stories can be the most powerful advocacy tool that we have. Social media, I think there is a real generational divide. That's where students are. And, we have to, I'm not on social media right now, but, I'm thinking about that's where movements are happening and forming and fomenting. And so I do think that we need to be on social media and the TikToks and all of that to get the students, meet them where they're at. I think there's so many hurdles, and I think not getting fooled by the okie doke, right? So the responses that some legislators will have saying, oh, we can't do this, $4 billion is too much money, or whatever their general responses are. I think we as the general public have to be smart enough to not fall for those traps and constantly demand stuff that seems impossible.
Yes.
Because it's only impossible until it becomes possible, right? I don't know if I said that
We saw
thing,
that
right?
during the pandemic too.
Right.
All the money that came.
All the money that came.
Miraculous.
And somehow we're all, somehow the world is still turning, right? And so I
Yes.
think it's incredibly, incredibly important to continue that fight and to not get deterred. So
Absolutely. I think as we're getting close to closing our time together, Mark, I'm going to let you give a quick comment, then we're going to try to close our conversation
Just
with some hope and
very
some
quickly,
sense of
I love the
commitment.
social media thing. If half the kids in Philadelphia went on TikTok and said, I want fair funding of my schools, that would be pretty powerful.
Wouldn't it?
The other thing is, we have an election coming up in November
Okay.
for the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I work for a nonprofit. I can't tell you who to vote for, but I can tell you got to go out and vote, because we've been
Yes.
talking about how important the courts are. This is a critical election for our future.
Yes,
Thank you.
so as we get ready to close, just want to say, this is not just a Philadelphia problem, as we said earlier. It's going to need organizing all across the state. It's in Lancaster, it's in Allentown, it's in Reading, it's in Aliquippa, it's in all parts, in the western part of the state, it's in Erie, it's in Harrisburg, all of these same issues, and it affects everybody. So we are trying to say to you all, if you're out there, talk to your legislators, talk particularly to, if you have Republican legislators, talk to them, and we can make a difference together. Thank you again so much for joining us and joining Just Nation, and we'll see you again soon with another program. Thanks so much.
Good night, everyone.